This week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, we discuss what sort of villain Hugh Grant will play in the new D&D movie, and discuss why I personally never level up my first level party members. All that and more right now. Hello everybody and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the best D&D podcast on the internet. 9 out of 10 lichers agree eternal life was worth it to keep listening to the Eldritch Lorecast. My name is Ben Byrne here, as always, with Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, James Hake. And James, I have a question coming to you from John, one of the listeners of the podcast, who asks us, what is our favorite gaming accessory when playing D&D? And this is, I think, kind of outside of the realm of the obvious of, you know, like dice, DM screens. What's like a peripheral that isn't necessarily vital to being able to play the game that you take to every session?
Right. So I wouldn't say something like a wet erase battle mat and markers. That's pretty core to the experience. My favorite accessory, other than, you know, maps and minis and the likes of that, is a Bluetooth speaker, which I plug in behind my chair so that I can play music and ambience while I DM.
You completely stole my answer.
I'm a very auditory learner, and beyond that, sort of an auditory experience. And so having that sort of that immersive audio is actually one of the most important things to me about running a game. And it's one of the hardest things I've had to give up as someone who's been DMing online for the better part of 2 years now.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. One of my players ended up buying me a Bluetooth speaker for my birthday one year because I just kept using theirs. And whenever they couldn't make the session, we all got really sad because there was no music. Dael Kingsmill, what about you? Favorite accessory that you have to take to every game?
I feel like I gotta go with some of the real basics. Bulldog clips, pipe cleaners, and a coin to flip.
Now for us Americans in the audience, what's a bulldog clip?
They have a different name. They're the black ones with they've got the two sprungy ones, and they come up when they go to
a binder clip.
Oh,
bulldog clip, very interesting.
Yeah.
Is that
I don't
a brand?
know why they're called that.
Teeth.
I don't know.
It's got the teeth.
You know what? That's probably it. Yeah. And they bite and they don't let go. I keep a set of bulldog clips, and I have character names sort of written on, you know, a handful of them, and the rest are black, and I clipped them at the top of my DM screen to show initiative, and anything that's just a plain bulldog clip is assumed to be a bad guy. Yeah.
There's initiative is a whole rabbit hole we haven't fallen down yet that we should at some stage. I'm just making a mental note of that for myself, because that's a discussion to be had one day. But for now, Shawn Merwin, an accessory that you take to every game.
The plain old index card. So valuable to make tents, to keep track of numbers, to keep track of initiative, to paper cut bad players with. You can turn them into minis by just tearing them into squares. They make a perfect cart that you can put a horse in front of. So many uses. So many uses.
Have you gotten really good at the Gambit style like card throw when you're trying to paper cut those particularly troublesome players? Just, whipping it out across the table?
Rather than accuracy, I go for volume. That way, it's
good.
Figuratively a death by 1,000 cuts. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for answering that with a straight face, James.
We'll let it slide. Good. No need to focus.
Quick little bit of Ghostfire gaming news. As we mentioned last week, Rob, our previous editor, has sadly moved on, but this week is one of celebration as we welcome Dante to the podcast, who you will know by his transitions.
Rob's still alive.
Rob's not dead.
Other projects.
There is no surer way to make people think that we killed Rob.
I assure you. Don't look into it. He's fine.
Perfectly safe.
No Robs were injured in the recording of a podcast.
We sacrificed him to the dice gods.
He's just a little tied up right now.
Dante, just sleep with one eye open. No, I'm just kidding. In more general news, last week, I mean, we all know this has been coming down the pipeline for a little while now, but Chris Pine was talking about the D&D movie that he is in, with famously Hugh Grant playing the villain of this movie. But the thing that jumped out to me was that he described it as a mix of Game of Thrones mixed with a little Princess Bride and a smidge of Monty Python's The Holy Grail, and described it as very like poppy 80s heartfelt, bit of the Goonies in there. Are we looking forward to a D&D movie that is described in this way? Dael, is this the sort of D&D movie you're hoping for?
Well, to me, that sounds like a D&D game. That sounds like a D&D game. You know, you got, oh, you're grim. Oh, no, everything's terrible. Ah, very serious, very scary. Ooh, monsters. And then also, run away! So I feel like for me, I mean, I think it sounds fun. And if it lives up to that fun, then I'll have a good time.
Is that what's core to you for a D&D movie? You want it to be fun? I say that so contemptuously, I don't intend to, but...
Really?
Fun,
You want
Dael.
it to be fun? Okay. Yeah, I think so. For me, I think yes, because otherwise you stray into the zone of it having to be pinned to a specific setting. If you really want it to be
Right.
a little bit more serious, I think you kind of have to pick a D&D setting and go with it. And then you're in trouble because you're really limiting your audience because there's, you know, only so many people who are so familiar with the setting. So for me, as someone who doesn't know anything about settings, discussed previously, you know, for me, I just want the fun. I just want silly fantasy fun romp.
Okay, that's fair. Shawn, does this sound like the D&D movie of your dreams?
Well, the D&D movie of my dreams would not cater to anyone else other than me. So I don't want that. I think the question is, what does D&D want from the D&D movie, right? Do they want just a bunch of money? Do they want people to actually watch the movie and then want to check out the game? Do they want to have it lead into a TV series, right? All of those questions come into play. What I want, if I'm going to break it down, what I hope for is a Guardians of the Galaxy movie, but fantasy.
Yes! Oh, that's a great description!
Right. Superheroes that not everyone was aware of. Everybody knew Thor. Everybody knew Hulk. Right? Everybody knew Iron Man. Nobody knew those other ones, or not many people knew. Yet the movie was still appealing to a large crowd. And that's what the D&D movie needs. They need to have characters that are quickly attract the audience to care about them, to find them interesting and want to see their exploits, and then get right into the gist of the movie. Otherwise, you are asking for trouble. And I don't think there are going to be many D&D fans. If the movie is appealing to a general audience, there are many D&D fans that will hate it in a very gatekeepery sort of way, which it's going to happen because it happens with every franchise. But I just hope that it's entertaining, and like Dael, I hope it's fun.
Sure. I like that the description of comparing it to Guardians. I think that's kind of what I would want in a D&D movie as well, because Guardians of the Galaxy takes itself emotionally seriously. You know, there are emotional stakes in that movie, and people point to spoilers for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 if you haven't seen it. The death of Yondu being this quite touching moment with Quill's arc through that movie and his experience of being a son of two different fathers, or a father and a daddy, if you will. It's a movie that's not afraid. Like, it's not, Guardians doesn't feel like it's winking to the audience with every other line, like the humor of it, even Rocket Raccoon's kind of like zaniness comes from a place of hurt from being this weird creature that's been experimented on. See, I can make everything grimdark.
And I think you just made a really good point about the sort of grounded personal stakes of Guardians of the Galaxy. Because all of the good action fantasy movies that I've ever seen, like the original Star Wars movies, have pretty personal stakes for their characters, in addition to being very fun. And whenever you lose touch with the reality of the show, even if it's supposed to be extremely heightened, that's when you lose the heart. And so I really hope this movie has a lot of heart. in addition to being fun. Heart and fun are the two components that we need to have here. Any movie that cites Princess Bride as an inspiration is going to be inspired by heart and fun. So I mentioned this on Twitter when this first was kind of in the public consciousness, but if this movie is half as witty as Princess Bride, it will be a great movie. I just hope that they really took these inspirations to heart, and that there is a lot of that heart in this movie. That's my hope.
I don't know where the quote originated from, but something I hope they do. I know it's been floating around on Twitter for a while, is the idea of a player character or a main character kind of dying in an earlier scene, and then they show up played by the same actor like in the next scene. That when I first read that on Twitter, I'm so sorry, I don't know who to attribute that quote to, but it just made me laugh so much, especially if they play it like no wink to the camera, no like side glance or anything like that. Just play it dead seriously. I actually think that could work really, really well. Somebody stabs a monster right through the head and another character comments, "Man, what a critical hit you just scored."
My big hope out of this movie, it's not even an Easter egg, but I really hope that this movie has the framing device of people playing D&D.
Yes.
I love Legend of Vox Machina, but there was no framing device, right? That was not a tabletop story. That was a fantasy story adapted from an actual play, which worked great for Legend of Vox Machina. But if you want to do a D&D movie, not a Forgotten Realms movie, not a Dragonlance movie, not an Eberron movie, a D&D movie, they need to be playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, and the other thing, if you want to make a D&D movie for wider audiences than just people who play D&D, you really need to have that audience surrogate character who can kind of funnel all the questions from the people who are like, what is a role-playing game? Through that character, probably Chris Pine. Let's be honest with ourselves, and it'll be great. Like it's funny. It's such a cliche or a trope, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. I think it can be really, really good. Like there's a series, a scripted web series about LARPing that was called Basic Adventuring 101, where the main character is just on their first LARP adventure, and it works so well because it really it gives you someone who you can ask questions to and then move on with the story.
Yeah.
And you get this like inbuilt arc as they learn how it works.
Yeah, and speaking of framing device, talk about Princess Bride. That had its framing device that worked very well.
Oh!
Yes.
Totally. There's a good web series. It's actually an Australian series called One for All, which is a YouTube series that does D&D scripted comedy, and it does have that framing device, and it works really well in some circumstances where, you know, you have that you could do that critical hit joke where the dude stabs the monster through the head and a character goes, "Man, what a," and then it cuts back to the framing device and someone goes, "Critical hit."
Please don't do the critical hit joke.
Do the critical hit joke.
The Australians are divided.
Take them down now. And then I think of like my favorite examples of D&D included in pop culture, things like Community's D&D episode or Freaks and Geeks. The finale of Freaks and Geeks has one of the like cool slacker kids go and play D&D with the nerds and just have a great time. But that sort of framing device for me is where a lot of the heart of the game is, particularly if you're translating it to fiction and media.
And don't forget that one of the directors of this movie, writers of this movie, was in Freaks and Geeks.
Wait, who? Huh? I
didn't watch Freaks and Geeks. John, he's got two last names. John, he was also on the show Bones.
Oh my gosh.
John with
Dael.
the two last names.
Baby Sweets! Oh, that makes me very happy.
I don't know what that is.
That's awesome. Because, okay, so in Bones, he plays Sweets. But then we watched Freaks and Geeks after we watched Bones. So in my family, we call him Baby Sweets in Freaks and Geeks. But now, because we love Freaks and Geeks, we now call him Grown Up Baby Sweets.
Right. So he's not John Baby Sweets with two last names being Baby and Sweets. Okay, gotcha.
He's Grown Up Baby Sweets.
Great. Grown Up Baby Sweets working on the D&D movie. That's we couldn't have wished anything more for that.
John Francis Daly.
Hey,
There we
did it.
go.
is.
got
did
there.
it.
With John Francis Daly. Hello, I hope you're a regular listener. He's like, my name is Francis Daly. Anyway. When we found out that Hugh Grant was cast as the villain, I think a lot of people were having flashbacks to Jeremy Irons kind of chewing the bleep out of the scenery in the early 2000s movie. Do we think Hugh, just on first impressions, I know we can't know because, we haven't seen the movie, but it's fun to speculate. Do we think Hugh Grant is going to make a good D&D villain, and what sort? Is he voicing a dragon? Is he an ancient lich? Is he an evil, corrupt king? What do we think he's playing?
Well, I feel like he's in a villain era of his acting career, right? Like he clearly finds interest in doing the villain characters that he has been kind of barred from doing for forever because, I mean, let's be real, Hugh Grant is one of those actors who does play the same character over and over again, but they're a very enjoyable character, so it's okay. But, he's clearly having fun being able to play bad guys, and I think there's actually some untapped potential in letting him be like a serious bad guy, right? Like he has the room to be the classic, British villain in an American genre film. He has a lot of room for that, and I think more power to him. I think he'll do a good job.
I heard a rumor somewhere that he's playing Lord Neverember, essentially from the Forgotten Realms, from Waterdeep. So I could definitely see him playing that role as sort of the affable in public, but behind the scenes corrupt and conniving character, as James could totally tell us, having written an adventure that highlights his exploits.
Neverember is legitimately an interesting Realms character because in 5th edition, he has never really appeared in front of the camera, so to speak. He's part of the inciting incident for Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and he is certainly involved in the reconstruction of Neverwinter, which was part of the Sundering event that brought 4th edition Realms to 5th edition. But he has not had his time in the sun, and now that we know he's a character in the movie, I wonder if they've been keeping Dael Neverember kind of up their sleeve, because I have a hunch that this movie has kind of been a long time coming, that it was kind of challenging to get this movie made. It would not surprise me at all if basically, this script was being tossed around as early as, 2015, 2016. It's just taken until now to get it into gear. And that would be perfect timing, right? Dragon Heist was being written summer 2017. So that the timing would fit perfectly.
I am not familiar with that character. So Dael actually has been.
Yes, let's. I'll give a brief
I know
rundown.
more about a thing than Ben.
Well, what I was going to say is, I can imagine Hugh Grant playing a very Tywin Lannister-esque. He could definitely be very intimidating. Just there's a scene in Game of Thrones where Joffrey cracks the shit at the small council and says, "I am the king." And Charles Dance just gives him the iciest, I do not give a about what you're saying.
And
expression.
the explicit tag goes on.
Oh, damn it! Damn it!
Ladies and gentlemen,
yes.
we got him.
Take him away.
But it's just this unbending look of this is not a guy that you want to mess with. He does not care what you have to say. He will end you if he wanted to, but he doesn't have to do it to prove that he needs to. And I feel like Hugh Grant could, play that very well. Just a look of contempt, but not one of I don't care about you. It's like that scene out of Mad Men where he says, I don't think about you at all. It's
just
beneath
highborn
contempt.
Superiority.
Exactly. And that's what Hugh Grant gives off that feeling. What can I say?
Yeah, absolutely. Dael Neverember is the Lord of Neverwinter. And Neverwinter got messed up in the Spell Plague and the Sundering. It got volcano erupted on, demons showed up.
Volcano erupted. Sorry, it's just a great verb. It got volcano erupted.
Neverwinter had a real bad time, and Dael Neverember basically embezzled money from Waterdeep to rebuild his city, and that's That's the sort of backstory to Waterdeep Dragon Heist,
Gotcha.
which he shows up for a little bit and then vanishes. So if this story at all involves him being a sort of holier than thou, better than you sort of nobleman who's willing to do absolutely anything, including stealing 500,000 gold from his allies in order to, rebuild his own city, re-entrench his own personal power, then I could see him being a very good, non-mustache twirling sort of villain for a movie like this.
But also very likable, right? A politician where he wants the people who live in his city to love him, and he wants that sort of adoration. And so there's always a smile, but there's always the wheels turning behind the smile.
Something that you just touched on, James, that it got me wondering is what is this movie in terms of what's the plot? What's the thing? Is it a heist movie? Is it an adventure, go to the dungeon movie? Do they spend most of the time in the dungeon, or is it like a city intrigue? What sort of D&D campaign would you want to see as a movie?
It's going to have dungeons in it.
And I would say
dragons.
dragons.
No, we need no dragons, but we need someone to say the line. Man, I was expecting some dragons in here, because I feel like you get that a lot.
You need to be doing a pass on the script. You have so many ideas.
Ben, I adore you, but I'm so glad you're not writing the script of this movie.
Yeah, exactly. Everything's written with an ampersand just everywhere they go.
Yeah.
I would bet dollars to donuts that a lot of iconic Forgotten Realms imagery, like the yawning portal that was really set up in the sort of early days of 5th edition, will show up in a big way in this movie.
That is the D&D movie. I guess we will have to wait to find out until...
Watch him. He's going to figure out a segue.
Was speaking of, I had one and now I've completely forgotten it. You've thrown me for a six.
I did it.
Speaking of words,
you could say this new D&D movie is a level up on the old one.
Okay.
I wanted to have a discussion. I feel like we almost had this discussion last week and then I didn't feel we had enough time for it. So now that we've got time this week, I really want to unpack a leveling up in D&D. How do we feel about the way that the system in 5e currently levels up? Do we like it? Does it work well? Are these not the right questions? I don't know yet. Let's find out. Dael, go.
Oh, man. Me? Oh, no. So some may not believe me if they've watched my videos. I actually do kind of like the way that leveling up works in 5th edition. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it. I think it's fine. I think it's good. But I did make a whole video about what if leveling in 5th edition wasn't sort of this hierarchical ladder of you get this, then you get this, then you get this, right?
Sure.
I talked about... there's a name for it and I don't know what it is. Non-linear something, which was just the concept of breaking up the way that levels work so that you take everything that you could get from a level and you spread it all out, just all on a flat surface, right? This is conceptually, this is a metaphor. And you can just pick based on XP spends, for example. And a lot of people were very cross at me for suggesting that leveling should work any other way than it actually does. So I actually like how it works, but people may not believe that I do.
Sure. Is this the way it's always been, Shawn? It's very discrete level ups. Basically, you get better at intervals.
absolutely, yeah. I mean, this is being one of the first role-playing games, one of the first times we saw it. There were some war games that also had this idea of, as you succeed, your infantrymen get more powerful or whatever. But for the most part, this D&D being one of the first role-playing games was one of the first times this stuff was used. It was even more discreet, I would say, for AD&D, for first edition, because not only did you have to earn the experience points to go up the level, you had to find someone who was better than you to train you. And that may be going to the biggest city and finding the Thieves Guild where that you could get some training. And that was interesting because that was one of the first times where, or one of the few times when the game actually looked at the world itself, because back then it was more like you go to this dungeon, you find gold. Who's your character? I'm just the rogue, right? I don't have a big background. Backgrounds weren't part of the game. There wasn't a lot of backstory. There weren't flaws or bonds or any of that. So it was just more like I do what I do. I go to the dungeon, I find the gold, I level up, and I go on to the next dungeon. So this sort of leveling was one of the few times in the game where you really had to think about what was going on in the world around you other than what you are doing. Oh, I have to go find this druid who could help me gain a level. So in that sense, it was very...
Does it have to be someone specifically of the same class?
Supposedly, yeah. And then each level had its own title.
That's so fancy.
Yeah, all sorts of things. So it was very much rigid in that sense. And some people liked that and some people didn't. And now, as you said, an hour later, I am 2 levels higher and I can do all these great things. I didn't train for it. I didn't really learn it. I just can do it now, which is for a game is totally fine. For an ongoing narrative, it's a little disjointed, so you have to come up with ways to either ignore it or find a way to explain it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's definitely a lot of thematic clashes with the way that leveling works in 5e and like the story that you may be trying to tell with your group, which we'll kind of crack into later. But I really like that concept, particularly at 3rd level, where a lot of classes are starting to specialize, that you need to go, like you could do a whole thing where you plan a campaign. First 2 levels are like clearing out a dungeon or clearing out 2 dungeons or whatever, doing a little bit of stuff. And then deliberately there's almost this point in the campaign where, all right, every session is a side story for another character to go and get their 3rd level. The paladin has to go to a temple and make their vows in a temple before the sight of their god, rather than just like doing it to themselves privately in the middle of the night, which is what seems to mostly happen when they go up to level 3. A ranger needs to go and find, another hunter, or needs to go out into the forest and attract their animal companion in this really story beat moment, rather than just kind of like, a long rest, burn some incense.
People were mad when I made a video about that too.
Oh, really? Why? Why were people mad about that?
People are mad about any video I make. It doesn't matter.
I didn't even see it and I'm angry.
I mean, I get that, like, it's hard to plan a campaign around that, and maybe people don't like the idea that, like, the paladin levels up 1 session and then everybody else has to wait until their turn to do their sort of side quest to level up. But I don't know, I just like that spotlighting of things. It's done with magic items more, I suppose, where, everybody has their magic item that they need to go in, the sword stuck in the stone, the bow that's up on a hill, the staff inside of a tree, all that sort of stuff to go, the boots that are in a closet somewhere. I don't know. Anyway, James, do you like leveling? Has it ever clashed in have you ever been like, this feels weird?
I like leveling up. I don't think D&D would be D&D without 20 linear levels to progress through, even and multi-classing as well. Those are 2 things that by this point are quintessentially D&D. You gain levels and you can choose which of 13 if you include Artificer base classes you choose to gain that level in. I've always been of the mind that they should happen over the course of a long rest.
Yes.
Because that means that the current sort of beat of the narrative has ended. There's a certain level of realism. It's not like really realism, but it's like believability. It's that word we authors love to use, verisimilitude.
Verisimilitude.
Which is just a fancy way of saying perhaps not realistic, but believable, not breaking of the suspension of disbelief. There's a Flash RPG I played when I was younger called Adventure Quest. There was one strategy I would always use to overcome some challenges that I wasn't high enough level for, and it was to plan my XP gain so that I would level up in the middle of a gauntlet of fights, because whenever I leveled up in Adventure Quest, I would regain all my health and mana. And it would be between, one fight with a pack of lizards and the boss. And I'd be like, all right, good thing I hit an arbitrary threshold and regained all of my health points and magic juice. Now I'll keep fighting. That's something that's fun for a video game, but it's something I try to avoid as much as possible in an RPG that sort of pretends at believability a lot of the time.
Yeah, I agree. There's a joke in my home game at the moment because I'm notorious for slow leveling. They can spend, sessions, weeks, months at level 5 if I let it go too long. And we've done 4 sessions and they're still at level 1. And I contend it's because they haven't taken a long rest yet. They keep wandering around and like, to the next thing. And I'm like, go to sleep. Stop making fun of me for not leveling you up and go to sleep.
How are they still alive?
I haven't been hitting them. I haven't been hitting them too hard, although I did almost take the whole group down with a chalk chatterling, which is a monster from the Monster Grimoire. I was describing, things clattering around in a closet and they could hear it sounded like an animal was in there and they opened the closet and I'm like, it's a whirlwind of chalk. And they were like, wasn't expecting that. And then they all took psychic damage and almost died.
What kind of damage does flying chalk do? Psychic, obviously.
That often happens when I open my closet. I take psychic damage.
Yeah. Something that I found really interesting, playing 4th edition for the first time recently, it was interesting to me to find out that it does not stop at level 20, right? Yeah. Because instinctively, I agree with what James said. I'm like, yeah, it feels right. 20 levels. That's good. Which I don't know where that comes from. I don't know why I feel that, because 4th edition doesn't do that. Pokemon doesn't do that. You know what I mean? Like it's where did I get that idea from? And one of the things that I talked about in my much maligned video is the idea that making it 20 levels kind of sends a subconscious message that that's how long a campaign should be. That's what it should be. You should start at 1 and you should go to 20. And if the story feels like it has more, you shouldn't really keep going because you've reached the maximum level. If the story ends before level 20, you got to find some way to extend the story beyond its natural limits because you need to make it to level 20. You know what I mean? I don't think it is baked into the rules, but I think it is a kind of accidental message that the 20 levels lineup sends. And so it is a bizarre kind of dissonance for me of being like, yeah, 20 levels, that feels right, that feels like D&D, but also being like, is it actually, and is it that important to how we play tabletop RPGs currently in our modern world?
Well, it's an interesting dynamic in the sense that this game can be many different things to many different people. And what levels give the game a chance to do is set up different play styles at the different level ranges. And it tries to do that, right? Tier 1, levels 1 to 4, you deal with local problems. 5 to 10, you deal with regional problems, et cetera, et cetera. And so the game could have 1 to 4 be like a gritty survival game. 5 to 10 be sort of a low magic, low fantasy game. 11 to 16 be a high fantasy game. 17 to 20 be a superhero game. And I think it tries to do that. It says it can do that, but making it actually do that is very difficult. To hit all the right notes at all the right levels.
Often because of the expectation that you will start at level 1. All video game RPGs, you start as level 1 character. You start up a new game of Skyrim, you're a level 1 guy. And you will end the game at whatever level you ended at. Having
to begin a new game of Skyrim.
What's wrong with that? I love early level Skyrim.
Sitting through the tutorial every single time.
You're finally awake. The biggest challenge, I think, with the tiers being different genres is the sort of complexity it layers upon them, because these levels are additive, but the stuff you gain, the sort of mental load, grows exponentially as you add more features. If you want to play a superhero game, I mean, there are games out there that have relatively simple rules that do superheroes pretty well. You look at Mutants and Masterminds or something like that. If you want to be fantasy superheroes in D&D, you'd better have sort of done the work of learning how 17 levels worth of character progression works before you actually get to that point. If you started a tier 4 game, you couldn't do it with a new player. I mean, you could, but I don't think it would be the ideal gaming experience for 99% of brand new D&D players to throw them in at a 17th level paladin.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
You know what else is interesting is that those superhero games, if we're talking about character progression in these games, superhero games frequently don't use leveling, at least not the ones that I've read, Masks, Icons, Mutants and Masterminds. These one of my favorites comes from, I bring it up all the time because I really like it, but Marvel Heroic Roleplaying had a really interesting character progression system that was really just based on like, what is your character arc? And that was the progression. It really didn't change anything mechanically about how you played or very little. But the progression was really about the story. And it's interesting seeing how that does frequently come up in the genre of superhero games, since that's what we're talking about as being high level D&D.
I think better than superheroes, because Western superheroes often rather stay static with their powers unless there's a story demand for it. High level D&D players are much more like shonen anime characters who power up at crucial moments, and those powers just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger until you're at the end of Gurren Lagann and they're throwing galaxies at each other. I mean, it's incredibly 20th level play what they're doing at the end of a big high powered action anime.
Yeah, when I said superhero, I didn't mean the genre of superheroes. I meant being able to have powers that can change the law, the laws of the world, essentially wish spells.
Totally.
Totally.
For sure. Yeah. But I do think it is interesting seeing the difference between character progression as it looks like in D&D, which we do think of, as like Shawn was saying, it's like the first RPG, like tabletop RPG. And so we have this kind of template that we work with that uses levels, but watching how that has expanded, how character progression has changed shape, changed what it looks like as the games have developed to include all manner of different things. Think about Monster of the Week and the way character progression works in that. Like, you fail at something, so you actually progress as a character. Like, that's really interesting to me. Just thinking about levels that don't look like levels, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally. I find the leveling system in 5e quite frequently to be and feel fairly arbitrary, in terms of like, you are now, we said at the start, you are now like 20% better. You have all these new abilities quite suddenly, and it can be jarring, especially in my experience between levels like 6 to 8 to 9. The jump in power level, I think, especially among spellcasters, feels quite sharp, where it goes from like, oh my god, it's a swarm of zombies, what are we going to do? We're going to fight all these zombies, to sickening radiance, just, burn them all up in half a moment. And as a dungeon master, it's like, oh wow, okay, I need to completely rethink how I challenge the party when I'm going to throw encounters at them. And that flip can come in a single level when, a new spell level gets accessed, and suddenly there's all these abilities that blindside you a little bit.
And I think one of the biggest hurdles for any dungeon master, whether they're new or old hat, is being prepared for those power tiers being scaled. Because it doesn't just change the nature of the gameplay, it changes the nature of the story. A story in which you have to slog through a horde of zombies is very different from a story where you can drop, you can drop hell on them with a single magic spell and be done with it. I've certainly had my moments as a DM where I got very, very frustrated with how trivial some of my sort of story beats could be made by sufficiently high level characters. And it was because I was committed to the sort of feeling of progression of leveling up without actually considering what the effects of leveling up might be.
Yeah, I had an experience, I think I've talked about it before, where we did a 14th level one-shot, and I was like, all right, it's going to be like giants tearing apart a city, and I'm going to have like 5 giants, a bunch of giants, so like they'll all be coming at the party at once, and I know I can't just have like club attacks and rock attacks. I'm going to think about having like saving throws when the giant hits the ground and causes earthquakes and fissures will open, and like trying to come up with abilities that will challenge the party's strengths as a 14th level party. And there was a guy who multi-classed like monk with rogue. So he had, I can't even remember, I'm making it up off the top of my head, but it was something like advantage on deck saves, evasion, so that if he made his deck save, he wouldn't take any damage. And his armor class was like 20 something. And he had the dodge ability, I can't think of what it's called off the top of my head, but basically half damage as a reaction. And I was just like, I can't hurt this guy. I just, like, nothing I have brought to this game can hurt this character, which, is maybe a great experience as a player. I'm not sure. But as the DM, I was just like pulling my hair out going, what have I don't know what to do with this. So it can be quite jarring jumping from like 7th to 14th level in that way. What is the mechanism by which we feel is best with 5e? For us personally, of course, when leveling up? Are we XP kind of people? Are we milestone kind of people?
Well, we
Are
already
a
learned
mix?
that Ben is the kind of people who doesn't let you level up ever.
Yeah. Levels don't exist. They're always level 1. Go fight the Taras. Good luck. Oh, well, I found that Milestone ended up working better because I never gave out XP. I never knew how much to give out. I was like, I don't know, you've killed this thing, take this much XP. Or, I don't know, that social encounter is worth X amount of XP. Is XP still in vogue? Does anybody love XP as a way to level up?
I use XP.
Okay.
I give full XP as expected for combat encounters, and then I ad hoc XP for social and exploration encounters. And at the end of every session, I will number the session. I'll give it an episode title, and I will break down all of the events that earned them XP in that session. And I hope none of my players are listening, but it's really all smoke and mirrors. I have a vague amount of XP I know I want to give to them per session, and I try and hit the target. And I justify it with something that kind of looks systematic, but truly isn't. And I think that's a really good sort of encapsulation of how XP works in D&D. It looks systematic, but it really isn't. And sometimes just the illusion of it being a systematic system is really valuable. It makes D&D feel a lot less arbitrary and kind of at the mercy of the DM. It's like, well, a player feels kind of more in charge of their own level and destiny if they know that I could just do a couple more encounters, and if I've been gaining more or less this much XP per session, then I can expect I'll level up in 5 sessions, and then we'll be good to go. It doesn't feel quite as arbitrary as a DM saying, all right, I know it's been 10 sessions since you've leveled up, but just keep going a little more. Eventually, you'll reach a story milestone, and you will have done what I decided it took for you to reach second level.
You've been speaking to my players.
Feeling the judgment. Shawn, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on XP, given... I mean, I feel like I constantly am just like, you wrote a monster book, but it's fascinating to me because it's so different from everything I ever do. But it seems to me that a lot of XP gets tied in with things like CR for monsters, right?
Yep, that's exactly how XP is done in 5th edition. You can have milestones where you are, as James said, giving it for events. But for the most part, it's kill the monster to gain the level. And if you don't do a lot of monster killing, then you don't do a lot of leveling. Unless you use those milestones. We could go back to 1st edition where different classes leveled at different XPs. So you could have everyone with the same number of experience points, but the rogue would be 4th level, whereas the mage, the wizard, would be 2nd level or less. So it's a history.
It's a lot to comprehend.
Yes, it is. And that's why I just sit, when I'm running for a home group, I say, hey, this is a great place for y'all to become 2nd level, become 3rd level. And usually those lower levels, Ben, like one 4-hour session, you're 2nd level. Another 4-hour session, you're 3rd level. Let's get to the parts of the game where an orc can't accidentally kill you with a critical hit. And then we'll go from there.
I think for me it's interesting because Milestone for me really does resemble that sort of video gamey quality of you pass the level when you beat the boss, right? By which I mean that I have basically 2 requirements, one of which is not always relevant. It's I want to know that everyone at the table has gotten a grasp on their character abilities for that level, which if you're dealing with new players is a big deal and could take a little while. If you're dealing with players who are really experienced, not even an issue, doesn't even come up. But it's like, Bard, I've noticed that you're not using Bardic Inspiration as much, so I'm going to keep us sort of here until I know that you've got a handle of that thing. Just as an example.
It's like a primary school teacher. It's like, I notice you're not quite reaching, you're not quite achieving at the level I need you to yet. But you'll go on to the next grade once I know you
better.
are. Yeah.
No, but I just
want to.
I just want to see that they are, using the tools that are already in their tool belt before I start adding more tools to the tool belt.
Sure.
But that's not always relevant. The other thing that is always relevant is, have they beaten an appropriately badass seeming boss for this level? Yes, great. Then I think we're ready, and it is milestone-y. It is at my discretion, but I try to keep it sort of intuitive with anyone who has played a lot of at least old school video games, back when there were levels in video games that you had to beat the level.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hey, Dael.
Oh my gosh.
Sorry, I'm very eager to speak.
Hey, James.
Sorry, I'm so
How's it
excited.
going?
I've gone into
Bringing it
ASMR.
down a bit.
Well, no, so I'd like to talk for a moment about Fables, Citadel of the Unseen Sun.
Please do.
And I want to talk in particular about the episode that's coming out next. I didn't plan this. This is just a lovely little happy accident. Episode 4 of Fables, Citadel of the Unseen Sun, takes place in the Ostoyan Empire. In fact, it's a very sort of open worldy episode after several highly constrained underground story beats. And all of a sudden we're like, okay, and into the wide world you go ahead and explore. We have these adventure areas for you. Be off, do it at your own pace, however you will. Very Witcher 3 sort of thing to do.
Ben's Witcher Watch.
Pour it up before I could. I've got a Witcher reference in my back pocket, but go on.
And so all of this Fable so far, and indeed all the next Fable that we're working on as well, we do milestone leveling, because I think when you're writing a pre-written adventure, that's the most sensible thing to do. But because all of these adventures take place over the course of several sessions, it's really important to us that we do a bit of a hybrid method where we put multiple and often redundant milestones with a maximum level cap. So let me explain how it goes here. In episode 4, you start at, I think, 7th level. And you can't gain more than 2 levels. Once you reach 9th level, no more leveling up until you go to the next episode. This is, you can continue to get treasure and rewards for, that are more social and can impact you on a more role-playing-y level. But as far as mechanical power goes, once you've hit 9th level, you can't level up anymore in this episode. And the way we do it is, in episode 4, there are 6 milestones. And every time you gain 2, you level. It could be any 2. You gain a level after every 2. And there's 6, you can only gain 2 levels. So once you've done 4 of the 6 milestones, you're good to go. There are definitely benefits to doing more of the content in that episode, right? You can still gain treasure, etc., like I said. But you don't feel like you're losing out power-wise if you have sort of a different rate of play than what we've expected you will have in the adventure.
And that's what I'm running right now for my home group, is the Fables. And we're having a great time, and it works out really nicely to be able to say, all right, I know that at the end of this adventure, I want them to be this level. I know that the challenge of the next adventure is going to be right in their wheelhouse. I don't have to worry about challenge rating and figuring it out all myself. Yeah. And that's why I'm loving running James' Fable.
Oh, that's so sweet, Shawn. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly well known that the CR system, as it originally was published in 5th edition, didn't work super well, both for leveling and for figuring out how difficult certain monsters are to fight, especially if a monster had a particularly zany ability that kind of, was well outside the capability of the party to deal with. And that's why I learned early on, and you guys are all going to call me monsters, or a monster rather, is that I did do XP, but I would half the XP given by the CR and then divide that by the party members so they wouldn't level up for... It was pretty quick in the early days, but after level 5, they wouldn't level up for ages. And I realized that it wasn't working super well as well because, Brendan Lee Mulligan has that clip on, I think, his podcast where he talks about, wizards going to wizard school and they go to open a book and start to study and all the tutors are like, no, study's not going to get you anything. You got to go out and start killing some things, to get that, to grab that magic power. And so that was ultimately, it was kind of the CR system not working for me. and being weirdly incentivizing players to go out and kill things. Because when I'm trying to figure out what the experience is for a social encounter, I'm like, well, all right, so maybe they get the equivalent XP of having defeated all these guards in combat instead. That doesn't really make sense because this, it kind of went on a single roll, got them through the encounter rather than, needing to work as a team to get through. So it just, it felt really weird. So that was ultimately why I swapped to Milestone. But I quite like what you described earlier, James, where it's sort of XP and there is a method to it, but it has a milestone sort of feeling where like almost every session is a milestone. They're getting somewhere. They have a feeling of ownership over their character and what they're engaging with to gain the experience to get to the next level.
It's definitely an easier system to use when you have like a lot of adventure planned out in advance. I don't think I would necessarily use the system for my home game where I'm flying by the seat of my pants a bit more, but it does work really well when you've got like a full adventure in front of you and you're like, how do I keep track of my player's power level over the course of this entire thing?
Quick, speaking of levels, you can level yourself up by emailing podcast@ghostfiregaming.com. If you want to ask us a question, something that we can chat about, we have an email in here from John. So John asked 2 questions, the one at the top of the episode, and he's also asked, I thought this was quite interesting. He asked us to define what spell lists are legal within our games of D&D, and he was referencing the official Wizards of the Coast spell lists and saying that everything that's in the player's handbook, the party can learn for free if they want to. You can choose it at first level, you can choose it as you level up. These are the commonly known spells. But anything that's in Xanathar's, Tasha's, any of the third-party modules, anything like that is like hidden arcane knowledge that needs to be learned from going out and finding spell books and scrolls and different things like that. I was just wondering, does anybody here kind of delineate spells in a similar sort of way, or you just like, nah, pull spells from anywhere? Or
I like that idea because I do have a tendency towards just saying just things from the player's handbook. Let's keep it simple.
Sure.
Partly because I have those decks of cards that makes it really, really easy to just be like, look, take something that's on a card, please.
Sure.
So I do tend to limit it to the player's handbook, but it's not because I don't like other spells. It's just because I don't have the capacity in my brain to know all those spells. You know what I mean? And I haven't sat down and read through the spell lists because I'm a human being. Yeah, I don't know. But I like that idea. That's a neat idea.
There's totally spells that somebody will say, I cast this. And I'm like, oh, is that in Tasha's or something? And they're like, no, it's in the player's handbook. And I'll flip through and I'll be like, there you go. There's this spell that's in there that I've never heard of before, It's a big list. Shawn, what about you? What's your approach to sort of magic within your world and arcane learning of spells?
I have used John's method before and I love it. I also use it for things like magic items. Players, give me a wish list of things that aren't in the player's handbook or the Dungeon Master's Guide that you would like, and we'll seed them throughout the adventure. But depends on the group that I'm playing with. With my home group, they are going to whine if they don't get to use their favorite new special thing out of their special new book. And so I let it go with the understanding that if it gets out of hand, then it will magically disappear from your character's brain. And we will not be using that anymore because we all want to have fun and we don't want the spell that we hit the auto win button, right, over and over again using whatever spell happens to have slipped through the cracks of some splat book somewhere.
For sure, because that spell list is growing, right?
Every day, new spells are born.
James, what about you? Do you have a different approach to this?
In the Wizards of the Coast hatchery.
This is where we nurse spells. They start in their little hatchery, and then We bring them in here. Oh, Peter's going in to get out a new spell now, and the door opens and just a giant claw reaches out and grabs him. And
the Jurassic Park scene with the velociraptors breaking out of the eggs.
Yeah, great. Push. Great.
This one's necromantic.
Ooh, all the lights start to fizz inside of the room. It's perfect.
I don't have any restrictions on spells in my home game at all, but I've often thought the game designer in me likes to tinker with the idea of what if we limited the amount of spells you could know at first level to an incredibly narrow group of like maybe damage spells only. Very simple. And then treated basically every other spell in the game as treasure, something you could find. Maybe it's the sort of Metroid player in me, but I love leveling up not by sort of numerical growth, but by finding new abilities and items. Metroid and Zelda, I think, inspires what I like to do in my home games a lot. This is the sort of thing that I feel would take not just a lot of, thought to make it work, but just a lot of legwork on the DM's part. This is a lot of like legitimate brass tacks game design that you have to do. And as cool as it is, I don't think there's enough hours in the day for me to ever really make this idea more than a novelty for like a one shot or something like that.
Yeah,
but damn, it would be cool if it worked. I assure you, it would be badass and fun and interesting.
Real neat.
It would be great. I'm telling you.
I like that idea of like spells, as magic items that can be seeded throughout the world, and they sort of are for wizards obviously copying spells into their spell book. But it would be cool if when a bard bards prepare spells. They know. Someone correct me. Sorcerers, they know spells. I know that for sure. When a sorcerer comes across a spell scroll, it's like, all right, when you next level up and you have this scroll, you can put it into your spell list as one of your spells known. I've definitely done... I think it would be interesting to take this concept further. I've said to players before, like resurrection magic doesn't beyond Revivify, which I consider almost to be more like CPR, kind of like electric shock, like bring them back because it's only a minute long.
Fun fact, Revivify is not actually a spell.
Is it not?
It's just someone knowing CPR.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just someone humming staying alive,
And you have to pay them in diamonds, otherwise they summon, it's conjure paramedic.
Conjure paramedic.
Yeah, great. But all other resurrection spells are kind of off the table because thematically I want death to have a consequence within the game. But using John's idea, which hasn't really occurred to me before because most players that I play with sort of just assume that all spells are on the table. And I think there's a lot of spells in Xanathars that have kind of become fundamental to a lot of player builds that I've played with, at least in terms of like... what's it called? Toll the Dead. I almost don't know a warlock that doesn't take Toll the Dead these days. Or the Dragon Breath spell. I think it's just called Dragon's Breath. It's a lot of fun to be able to be like, yeah, I'm going to breathe fire right now, or electricity, or whatever it is. But what if you took all necromantic spells off? You were like, necromancy is banned because people hate the idea of the undead. You cannot choose necromancy spells at level ups, even if you are a necromancer wizard. But maybe your quest is to go out and learn necromancy. Or maybe it's, necromancy might be a bit stereotypical. What if it's evocation? We do not want mass destruction to be possible at the flick of a wrist. So evocation spells are so difficult to learn, and we've burned all the scrolls that have them. So you have to go out and find evocation spells to learn, which might be hard for wizards at early levels if they don't have an evocation cantrip to be able to do damage
Back
in
to the
combat.
days of wizards with slings and darts,
There you go. I don't know. I think it's a very interesting concept that would create a very specific theme for a campaign, but definitely something I would like to play with. And my players will be like, please, no, I just want to be able to throw a firebolt.
Also, please, can we be level 2 now?
Yeah, that's really the danger, right? It's all these cool ideas that we as DMs have that I think for the most part, players just kind of just aren't interested in.
It's yet another argument in favor of the short campaign length.
Yeah, that's true. Speaking of spells having only a 6-second casting time, this is a 60-minute casting time podcast. So this is the end of the episode. Go tell your friends. If you want to ask a question, email podcast@ghostfiregaming.com.
Yeah,
or
and
you
let
can
us
leave...
know in the comments underneath this video if you're watching on YouTube. Let us know, what spell would you hatch in the Whatsy Rookery?
What's your favorite spell? Let's get some game design going on the YouTube in the comment section. Go tell your friends. 9 out of 10 liches can't be wrong about the Eldritch Lorecast. I've been Ben Byrne here with Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, James Hake, and we will catch you all next week for another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast.